Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Like always, your host, Dr. Jared Vasquez. We're usually discussing in the channel medical situations, injuries, pretty much that happen within the fight game. But this time, we are going to discuss something that could potentially cause an injury to somebody's record and somebody's pocket. A situation that happened with Joe Schilling the past week. It's been all over social media, and I have the number one, the premier combat sports lawyer in MMA Twitter. Erik, I've been on MMA Twitter. First of all, I'm super happy to have you on. Um, you're the only one in Twitter, in MMA Twitter, in this crazy community to bring the interesting point of view of a lawyer to all the discussions that are had about the wonderful sport that we love. First of all, let me ask you a question. Give us your background a little bit, just so we can understand, your expertise and what you do for a living.
Oh, sure. Well, first, Doctor, thank you for that flattering introduction. So by background, I'm a personal injury lawyer. I practice in Victoria, BC, Canada. That's on Canada's west coast. We're cooking right now in a heat dome, so we've got Florida-like temperatures up here. For about 20 years, I've been in the suing business. So I sue people for various personal injuries, assault, battery, negligence, all those kinds of things. And in the combat sports world, I've been a licensed judge for professional boxing, for mixed martial arts, kickboxing, and Muay Thai for several years. And over probably the last decade, part of my practice has involved helping people deal with regulatory issues in mixed martial arts. So dealing with athletic commissions, suspensions, licensing, all those kinds of things.
Right. You are the guy to talk about this situation, and of course, I am talking about the altercation that the fighter, past Muay Thai fighter, kickboxing fighter, all around tough guy, Joe Schilling. He's I believe he's trained in the past with the Diaz brothers, so he's kind of part or runs with that crew, that gym crew, and very very loved character in mixed martial arts. Of course, he's been on the Joe Rogan podcast. We know that the reach that gives a fighter, so he's loved in the community. But I've seen mixed results. Of course, as we talk about this, I'm gonna be editing in the clip that shows Joe Schilling in a pub, you know, getting near this Patreon that was there drinking, that this person that was drinking in the pub, and he proceeds to hit the drunk guy with a two piece, drops him with what I can only call two perfect shots from a professional boxer. And I don't know if on your end you've seen the opinions in social media, but it seems like it's divided down the line. This is um, usually people would back up the fighter, but in this instance, I see the public opinion right down the line. What's your take on the temperature of the community receiving this video?
Yeah, I agree. Normally, and it's a tunnel vision community. It's MMA Twitter, so
Yeah.
you get biased replies one way or the other. I just put a poll up last night to get a feel for this because I actually wanted to have these numbers for you. And again, take it for as unscientific as it is. But I put a tweet up. Okay, you're the judge and jury. Let's see where you land on this one. Option A is Schilling overreacted. Option B is Thai guy deserved it. And I've got an 80-20 split. 80% of the responses, and I've had 238 people reply, 80% of them are against Joe Schilling on this one. They're saying Schilling overreacted. So that does seem to be where the majority of opinion lands. I imagine if you ask people outside of that combat sports bubble, it's going to be even more skewed towards vilifying Schilling, saying this is completely an overreaction. Legally, it's a little more complex than that, though. I actually don't think there's a crystal clear answer of what's going to happen here. And I'm happy to get into that if that's where you want the conversation to go. But if lawsuits arise, and I imagine lawsuits are going to arise, they've already been threatened and there's already a lawyer involved. That video comes down to a fraction of a second in terms of what's legally relevant. Right before Joe unleashes hell on this guy, and his name's come out. His name's apparently Balboa. So Balboa is the guy who gets dropped. Schilling is the pro fighter. Right before Schilling drops him with a great 1-2, Balboa does something really interesting. He flinches his left shoulder towards the guy. And you've probably seen 100 videos on this if you've never seen a live street fight. Your average untrained person, they like to start a fight with a wild haymaker.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
What Balboa is doing is, I don't know if he's throwing a haymaker, but he's at least pretending to throw a haymaker. He does one of these. And that's intended to make Schilling at least flinch. That's what's going on. And the legal concepts at play here, there's two things going on. There's battery and there's assault. Assault means threatening violence. Doesn't have to be with words, it could be with actions. And so the question is Balboa assaulting Schilling? Is he making Schilling believe that he's about to have a punch coming to his face? The second legal concept is battery. Battery is actually applying force to somebody else without consent. So if you have harmful or offensive contact and a 1-2 punch to the head, causing a concussion, causing a brain injury, that's going to meet the test of battery. You have Schilling committing a legal battery, and you have Balboa arguably committing an assault, which triggers that battery. And the whole legal analysis is going to turn on that fraction of a second. Exactly.
That's interesting. And the reason I had this conversation is because, I'm going to put this video on Rockfin too. That's a platform where a lot of young wrestlers look for their content. And Ben Askren is a influencer there, Chael Sonnen. And I think it's really important for younger kids that are going into the fight game to understand all these terms, because we have that old information from the 80s. I'm 43, so, you had the Mac Dojo era and everybody telling, their friends that they registered their hands as lethal weapons. That narrative, you probably remember all the before MMA, before martial arts were tested against each other. You had everybody in karate, on kung fu, and the claim of lethal weapons, the hands being registered as lethal weapons. But it's important for young athletes to understand what they could be involved in legally and what could be the extent of the crime and punishment, playing in this sandbox scenario, a worst case scenario for Schilling here. What let's say that with all the nuances, that fraction of a second, the flinch and all that stuff, but let's say he has a bad day in court. What could be the worst thing that he's facing?
So first, I'm actually going to get into the one thing you mentioned, which is this registering your hands as deadly weapons. And I'm old like you. I remember the 80s pre-MMA were and we were kids back then, but a lot of nonsense was believed. Funny times. But here's the funny thing. Registering your hands as deadly weapons isn't a complete myth. It actually exists in American jurisdiction. Okay, believe it or not. I've got a very fledgling YouTube channel, but this is one of the videos I made. The U.S. jurisdiction of Guam requires karate and judo experts to register their hands as deadly weapons. Yeah, and if you don't register your hands as deadly weapons, it's a misdemeanor. And if you are a registered expert with the government, and if you're charged with assault, it becomes aggravated assault by virtue of you having these government recognized deadly weapons. So believe it or not, it exists. If you go to my website, combatsportslaw.com, I document it. I actually put the real law up there. You have to pay $5 to the government, and they give you a certificate showing you're registered. And that's the stuff all these guys in the 80s exploited. They'd get their $5 certificate and say, I'm registered, or even lie about it, because who's going to Guam to get your certificates to tell people you've got deadly weapons? But there's actually a grain of legal truth in that myth. But the fascinating thing isn't what's happening in Guam, because, I'm sure 99.9% of people that watch this won't be in Guam. But in the United States and in a lot of other jurisdictions, even though you don't have to register, something that's not completely unheard of is when a trained fighter is charged with assault, or if a trained fighter is sued for assault and battery, sometimes their training is considered an aggravating factor. And there are examples in the US where a trained fighter is charged with assault and it becomes aggravated assault because they're considered to have deadly weapons. And there's even cases where people have been convicted of assault with a deadly weapon where their hands were considered deadly weapons by virtue of MMA training. There's a case out of Texas where that happened. There's a case out of South Carolina where that happened. And if you find my article, I actually link to some of these court cases. So it's not a complete myth. And having training is, or could be, legally relevant. And let me break down why. The law loves the word reasonable. And it's this vague concept to try to make everything easy to understand, but it's complicated in theory. So here's the legal analysis. Balboa does one of these. And the first question is, did Joe believe violence was about to be unleashed on him? Now, he says tongue-in-cheek he feared for his life. I don't believe it for a second, but he says he feared for his life. He sees worse than that flinch 1,000 times a day in the gym, so I don't buy it. But did he believe violence was about to come his way? Maybe. Only he knows that. The next question is where this word reasonable comes in. Would a reasonable person believe some violence was about to come your way? The answer is maybe. You don't know that, I don't know that, but that's what a judge or a jury would be asked. Would a reasonable person fear for their safety? And if the answer is yes, the next question is, if you're a trained fighter, is unleashing that vicious 1-2 combination a reasonable response? That's the next thing. If you fear for your safety reasonably, you're allowed to use reasonable force. What's reasonable for one person might not be reasonable for another. And that's where training becomes a double-edged sword. Yes, training is going to help you look after your own physical integrity. But if you're in a court of law, you could start looking at, okay, what's reasonable? Hey, Joe, you train with the Diaz brothers. People said this on the internet. Why don't you give them one of those little Stockton slaps? That might be reasonable. Maybe you just tackle the guy. Maybe you body lock him. Maybe you take him down. Maybe you just take a step back. All of these are reasonable options for a trained, bigger fighter to stop the violence from coming their way. But maybe, just maybe, a quick 1-2 is reasonable as well. And here's the one lesson. This isn't a legal lesson, but the one lesson is don't be a dumbass and try to make somebody flinch. This isn't the schoolyard where you're going to get 2 for flinching. In the real world, if you make the wrong person flinch, it might be Joe Schilling, where his trained reaction is to just come at you faster than you even see what's coming, and now you're dropped with a brain injury. That's what this guy got. So him trying to make Joe flinch, if that's what he was doing, was a really stupid move. That's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, and I've said this on previous podcasts talking about other bar fights that went viral, don't get in bar fights. And so here's a really good teachable moment. Earlier this week, I think it was over the weekend, Michael Bisping put up a tweet. He was down in Louisiana, and he says some jerk just punched him in the face. I'm just going to read his tweet. He says, "Guy got in my face for filming on a public street. I told him to go away, and he punched me. Was literally so soft I laughed at him. So funny that somebody acts so tough, hits like such a bitch. I laughed and I walked away." Now, nobody says, hey, go get punched in the face and walk away, turn the other cheek. You could punch the guy back. But here's the lesson. Here's the real world lesson. To Bisping, this was just a funny moment. He laughed at the guy. He moved on. He wasn't hurt. Guess what? The police aren't considering battery charges. Nobody's talking about assault with a deadly weapon. Nobody's talking about a lawsuit involving brain injury. So you could walk away. And you don't want to get hit in the face and lose face and you'll walk away like the lesser man. But guess what? If you walk away and you're not harmed and there's no legal consequences, you go on with life. Joe Schilling might not have that option. Whether it was reasonable, whether it wasn't reasonable, now he's in for a world of financial hurt. Even if the lawsuit's not successful, he's paying lawyers. His time is going to be consumed with this. He's got a year or 2 of his life where he's thinking about this lawsuit. He's thinking about possible criminal charges. So if you can walk away, that's a good option. And the law does explore that. It says, hey, are you really scared? If you're really scared, could you just have walked away from this guy who's apparently drunk? Is he really a threat? Or do you have to brain injure him to nullify the threat? That's the legal stuff that's going on. And sorry, I totally sidetracked your simple question. Lawyers like to talk.
No, you went perfect there. You feel that all that not, and it's important because you're telling it from the point of view of somebody that has the all the, you just opened my mind. I'm here listening and saying, it makes complete sense, and this is what I wanted younger fighters or fighters that are starting in the game to listen to. This is the clip I want them to listen to and say, hey, look at Bisping. He was with his family. He got punched. He laughed it off. He probably was aware of his surroundings. It wasn't a threat. He kept moving. He's not going to spend any money on legal defense. He's not going to be vilified. His stock rose because he's like, this guy hits like a bitch. Like you said, I bet if it was something a little bit more dangerous, something might have went down. But he assessed the threat, and I think Joe Schilling could have done this. It's interesting to analyze from both points of view, but that's the clip. That's the important information. And the other thing I wanted to ask you was, is the bar as an establishment, is the bar itself going to be involved in litigation? Could they be named in the suit as well?
Yeah, so they might, okay, and here I have to defer to Florida attorneys because the law, unlike medicine, right, a heart attack is a heart attack and a broken leg is a broken leg, and it doesn't matter where you guys are. The law changes state to state, province to province, and generally, let me just explain it this way. Generally, if a bar overserves a patron, somebody gets hammered, and that patron in a drunken act of idiocy harms somebody else, the bar could be sued. That's pretty standard fare. A lot of jurisdictions have limited the ability of the drunken patron himself to sue the bar. So you can't say, hey, I got hammered and you served me way too much booze and now I did something stupid and that's partly your fault. That flies in a lot of jurisdictions, but it doesn't fly in a lot of jurisdictions. I don't know the answer in Florida. I can tell you a lawyer sitting in a chair like mine is going to be trying to find a way to go after the bar, because we know a lot of pro fighters are underpaid. We know pro kickboxers are terribly underpaid. We know pro MMA athletes, many of them are terribly underpaid. Joe Schilling might not be a liquid guy. This victim, or I shouldn't even call him a victim, but Balboa might be thinking, hey, I just got injured by a pro athlete. I'm in the money. He might be in for a rude awakening when he realizes Schilling might not have a ton of cash. And the lawyer's going to want to go after somebody that has assets. The bar is going to be the obvious target, but I don't have an easy answer for whether the bar would be liable here. The easiest path is to go after Schilling, and then the lawyer will try to find a way to hold the bar legally accountable. But the one question you asked me I haven't answered is what could the lawsuit entail? Generally, if Balboa is successful and he proves, hey, you hit me for no good reason or excessively in the circumstances, it can get expensive because this part I laughed about. The police report, you could tell the cops don't want to charge Schilling. The police report, I think they called it a scuffle, which is about as minimizing of a term as you could have. And then they said this guy's injuries were a bloody lip. Now, you're a medical doctor. You know he suffered a brain injury, correct?
Correct. He had the posture of somebody that was severely concussed, the outstretched arms, the head posture. So it was, and he hit the concrete with his head. So that's minimally just a moderate to severe concussion, probably.
You got it. And concussion, just to make this crystal clear for the non-doctors out there, concussion means traumatic brain injury, correct?
Correct. The term is exactly that.
Yeah, and so I love the police saying he's got a bloody lip. Well, actually, he has a brain injury. It's on video. There's really no debate about that. The question then is, how severe are the consequences from the brain injury? Is he knocked out, comes to, and he's fine? Or does he start having post-traumatic headaches? Does he develop post-concussion syndrome? Does he have a constellation of cognitive problems that are going to haunt him for many years? We know that's not medically unusual. We know most people recover with no consequences whatsoever. We know a small percentage of people go on to have lifelong problems from a single brain injury. So the question is, what are his consequences? And the amount of the lawsuit follows those consequences. So does he need a lot of medical care? Is he unable to work? Are there lost wages? Does he have difficulties in his interpersonal life? Is the pain and suffering number, going up and up and up? And so depending on his prognosis, the dollars follow from there. And it could be anywhere from a very modest lawsuit for a quickly recovered concussion to a very, very expensive lawsuit if we're talking about some level of long-term disability. So it's not a trifling matter. And doctor, you actually raised another thing. If you're talking about young fighters, young men and women looking at this, if you look at bar fights, guys out there listening to this, the consequence is almost never that 1-2 punch, I laid him out. Oh, I'm a good fighter and I hit the target. The consequence is that unconscious guy smashing his head on the bar stool or on the bar or on the concrete. And this guy looks relatively okay. I don't want to minimize a brain injury, but this guy got up and seems okay. A lot of people die when they're knocked out and like dead weight, they smack their head on an unforgiving surface. It's not a ring. It's not a canvas. A lot of people get a skull fracture. A lot of people get a second brain injury on the first brain injury.
Yeah.
Brain bleed, all that nasty stuff that you know a lot more about than me. A lot of people drop dead. And now you're looking at real criminal charges. Now the cops aren't calling it a scuffle. Now the cops aren't saying, oh, he got a bloody lip. The drunk got what's coming to him. Now the cops are saying, hey, this is maybe manslaughter. You've got a problem. Don't get in bar fights. If you get in a bar fight, try to de-escalate it. If you can't de-escalate it, try to get away, because you could have consequences way beyond what you intend. And then the legal consequences, well beyond anything you ever want to be exposed to, are going to follow you. So that really is the sensible advice. These drunken bar situations lead to results that often nobody intends, but are completely predictable if you pay attention to past results. So avoid bar fights. That's the most sensible legal advice I can give anybody.
Exactly. And people think it's a weekend, 2 days of legal stuff. I love that you said this is going to be years for Joe Schilling, that he's going to be dealing with this. So it's not a weekend. It's not a call to your lawyer and everything gets resolved. It's something that's going to take years to resolve. Joe Schilling, I know he probably didn't do it with the intention of severely harming the guy. There was some apparently racist remarks being said by the guy. Allegedly, he was saying some racist things in the bar. So he was trying to be a good person. We've seen the video of him throwing out somebody that wasn't appropriate as well in his gym and kind of smacking around the guy. So it's sad to see him involved in all this stuff, especially coming out of a loss in his last fight. We know the economical circumstances that a loss puts a fighter like Schilling on. So it's hopefully he gets this solved with minimal economical issue, but it doesn't seem to me like it will be.
Yeah, and I didn't get into those allegations of racist comments or anything like that because it's not on the video. But I will say this though, just in terms of the legal narrative, none of that stuff matters. If the guy, and I'm not going to even say he was drunk, but it's alleged he was drunk. So if Balboa is drunk, if Balboa is being an asshole, if Balboa is insulting people, if Balboa is being lousy to the staff, if Balboa is being lousy to Schilling, none of that is self-defense. You're not threatened with violence. So the law is not going to be very kind to laying hands on somebody. And that's why I say this case boils down to a fraction of a second. It's all about that shoulder flinch. That's what the case is going to boil down to. And that 80%, 20% opinion, that's actually what a lot of people's, even without necessarily understanding the legal nuances, that's where a lot of people naturally go. They say, hey, this guy tried to make a pro fighter flinch. What a dumbass. Other people say, good God, Joe, there's no way you were scared. There's no way that reaction was reasonable. But people intuitively understand what the law is going to force that jury or judge to focus on, which is that fraction of a second. All that other stuff is white noise. That's just the story. I'd say the only other thing that matters is in that when they bump into each other and Joe turns around, I would love to know who said what. Because if it was, oh, I'm sorry, versus, hey, screw you, that's a different situation, right? You've got an apology versus somebody basically escalating it to a violent situation. So those key words will matter. But other than that, everything else is going to be white noise.
Exactly, exactly. Well, you illuminated everything I wanted to know. I want to thank you for coming on with me, Eric, and giving me your time. You know, your profession, I know that is as equally busy as the profession of a physician, and you know, it means a lot that you took this time to talk to me and illuminate younger fighters because the Schilling stuff is good to know, but I wanted like the real solid, no nonsense perspective of somebody as objective as yourself. And I really appreciate it.
Yeah, doctor, thanks. My pleasure. And anytime, I always love talking combat sports and lawsuits, so it's a perfect storm. If you ever need legal commentary, feel free to bring me on. Thank you.
Absolutely, Eric. Thank you. I appreciate you, my friend.